Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Washington County Board of Education business meeting for October 15th, 2013. We have a quorum of members present. I'd like to call the meeting to order. To begin the meeting, I would like to introduce Aaliyah Ballard, who is a fifth grade student at Hickory Elementary School, who is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Most wanted al-Qaeda leaders pleaded not guilty to terrorism charges in federal court today in New York City. NBC's Richard Engel was at the arraignment of Abu Amal.
Thank you, everyone. Aaliyah, would you like to introduce the people you brought with you today?
My grandmother, my principal, and Miss Vance.
All right. Well, welcome. Thank you all for making sure Aaliyah got here. Aaliyah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you like to do? What do you do when you're not in school? What's your favorite subject?
My favorite subject is math.
This is getting old.
I told you they would think it's a plant.
And when I'm not in school, I like to do batons, like majorettes.
You do. Good for you. Are you going to be in any parades this year?
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming and starting our meeting, and thank you to the team who brought her here. And we wish you every success in the school year this year.
Thank you.
Any other board members have guests that they'd like to introduce this evening? If not, we'll move to the approval of the agenda. The agenda proposed by the Agenda Planning Committee was distributed. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Is there any comments or discussion?
Mr. President, I move to amend the agenda to add an item under old business to lift the suspension of policy BAA.
Okay, Mrs. Fisher makes a motion to add an item under new business to lift the suspension of policy BAA. Is there a second to that amendment?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Fisher, you have the right to speak first to your amendment. If not, we'll open the floor for
I have no
anybody else.
comments at this time.
Anybody else wish to offer comments? If not, the question is on Mrs. Fisher's amendment. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion, any abstentions? Thank you. I didn't think I saw your hand, that's why I was pausing. So the motion passes 6-0. The student member concurs with the prevailing side, and one member abstains. Okay, are there any other comments or questions on the agenda?
Mr. President, based on Mrs. Fisher's amendment, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda under old business to include a first read to rescind policy BAA and exhibit BAA-E.
Okay, Mr. Ridenhour moves to amend the agenda to include the first read to abstain policy B, to rescind policy BAA and exhibit BAA-E. Does that correctly state your motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Bailey seconds. Is there any discussion? Mr. Ridenhour, you have the right to speak first. If not,
Thank you.
anybody else wish to offer comment? Mrs. Harshman?
I will not be voting to rescind this policy because I think the board owes the public that elected it the opportunity to see how we evaluate ourselves. So I will be voting against rescinding this policy.
Thank you, Mrs. Harshman. Is there any other discussion? Just to be clear, this vote is to place the item on the agenda. This isn't the vote on whether we do anything with the policy. Just want to be sure everybody's clear. Is there any other discussion or comment? If not, all those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed? The motion passes 5-2, and the student member concurs with the prevailing side. Are there any other motions or amendments or comments on the agenda? Hearing none, the question is on the agenda as amended. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 5-2, and the student member concurs with the majority. Next, we move to the approval of minutes.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of our minutes from a closed session meeting held on October the 1st, 2013. And on the same date, the business meeting was held with minutes from that meeting, and I would move for the adoption of both sets.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Are there any comments, corrections on the minutes?
Mr. President,
Fisher?
could we possibly separate those two to vote on them? I was here for one meeting, but not for all of the other.
Sure. You want to withdraw the second, Mrs. Brightman?
I withdraw.
Mr. Bailey, you want to?
I will restate the motion that I would like to move for the adoption of the minutes from the closed session held by the board on October the 1st, 2013.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Is there any comments or discussion or corrections to that set of minutes? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0, and the student concurs.
Mr. President, at this time, I would like to move for the adoption of minutes from our business meeting held on Tuesday, October the 1st, 2013.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Brightman. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes? Mrs. Williams?
I'd like to offer a correction on page 203. In the first large paragraph at the top, it has Mrs. Harshman ask about the decline in the number of students enrolled and taking exams at 2 high schools. That was in fact my question, so I'd like to have Harshman changed to Williams.
Okay. Is there any comments on her correction? Is there consensus to approve that correction? Excellent. Are there any other comments or corrections? If not, the question's on the approval of the minutes as corrected. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 6-0 with
One abstention.
one abstention. I
So I
assume the
wasn't
abstention.
only
I'm
here
sorry.
half the
And
meeting.
the student member concurs. All right. Next on the agenda is public comment. We have 2 members of the public who have signed up to speak. Just to remind everybody of the procedures for public comment, each individual is given 5 minutes. That's a guideline. Nobody here is going to cut you off, but we can't have it go on for too long a period of time because we do have a meeting. But we're very interested in hearing what you have to say, and we just ask that you not direct comments at any particular personnel or anything that could be perceived as going after an individual staff member. But otherwise, if it relates to policy, practice, anything, we welcome your comments. The first individual who signed up to speak is Wendy Crossland. Wendy, welcome.
Tell you why I'm here?
The floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, this is my daughter. She would have been a junior this year at South High. This is her twin brother, Dorian, my younger daughter, Jade. She died almost 2 years ago from energy drinks, and that's why I'm here. I wanted to get a county-wide ban on energy drinks on school campuses. Like my daughter, I know a lot of kids are bringing these to school. My daughter bought them at the candy store. I didn't know she was buying them. I didn't know she had them. She went into cardiac arrest at our house. I did CPR on her. Got her in the ambulance. We flew to Hopkins, and 6 days later she was brain dead. Never regained consciousness. Her cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia due to caffeine toxicity. Let me just give you a little background. In addition to my daughter, there have been many others that have died, and a few have been on the athletic fields. That's a big no-no, drinking energy drinks, and then going to play athletics. They have been tied to liver damage, kidney failures, seizures, heart arrhythmias, and sudden cardiac deaths. They interact with ADHD medicine, diabetes medication, asthma medication, as well as antibiotics. And they are also linked to an inability to be attentive and behavioral problems, which, when you think, oh, they had caffeine, they'll perk up, but that's not what the studies are finding. In 1995, when they started kind of collecting information, 1,100 ER visits were reported. In 2011, they were almost 21,000. They market to kids, just like the tobacco companies did in the 50s. They're considered dietary supplements, and they're not regulated by the FDA. In contrast, sodas are regulated to no more than 72 milligrams of caffeine per 16-ounce can. In contrast, a Red Bull has 160. A Monster Energy has 184 milligrams of caffeine. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a statement that children and adolescents should not be consuming energy drinks at all, and adolescents that are consuming caffeine should only be 100 milligrams at the most a day. In June of this year, the American Medical Association has voted to ban the sale of energy drinks to those under 18 years of age. I'm currently working, it was about 3 months after my daughter died, I went to Congress and I met with a different senator's office every week, a different one, until somebody decided to jump on board. And now I have 4 senators from Illinois, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and West Virginia. I was at a Senate hearing a couple months ago, and they introduced me, and so I'm used to speaking. I also met with the state legislature, and they are going to be proposing a bill to ban them to minors in Maryland this current session. They're not only dangerous, they're a legal liability. And if you're wondering, it's already been implemented in counties in Florida, California, Great Britain, New Zealand. San Diego is currently working on it. Burbank, California has banned them on campus. So, the other people are doing this as well. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Crossland. Anybody have any brief comment to offer among my colleagues? Ms. Harshman?
Just thank you for your information.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for your time.
I'd like to thank you, too, for sharing your story with us, and it's bringing your whole family to do it. We appreciate your giving us a lot to think about, so thank you for coming. Next signed up to speak are Jeff and Patty Jones.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
That really puts everything in perspective, doesn't it? Makes our appeal seem pretty petty compared to that. There are a lot bigger issues out there than what we came to talk to you about today. It really gets to your heart. The reason that we are here today is to appeal to you to see if we could allow St. Maria Goretti student athletes who live in Washington County to participate in the Washington County Cross Country Championship meet. Goretti has had a team for 4 years. My son Patrick was there when the team started as a freshman and has every year wanted to participate along with the other student athletes in this meet, and we've been denied every year. So we felt this year, as a senior, he would love to participate. I know he's friends with a lot of the other students in the other schools, the public schools, and we compete with these kids during the whole season. We're at all the different schools in the county competing weekly with these kids, yet we're denied to compete with them in the county championship. And we were wondering if it's possible to change the policy to allow our kids, and like we said, we wanted to make sure that it was only the kids who are living in Washington County, because we do have kids at Goretti from other states. We wouldn't want the kids from other states to compete in this county championship. But it is a time-sensitive matter because the championship is next week, and this would be Patrick's last chance to run with these kids during his high school career. We do have another son who's a freshman at Goretti as well, so he's coming through the ranks, and would hope that he would have the chance to do the same thing.
The city championship was tonight, and everybody ran together, and Patrick was getting over a virus, making an excuse for why he didn't do better. But the North and South folks came up, they hugged him, they formed a real bond and a real friendship over the years of running together. And I'd like to see that continue, and I think the participation in the county meet would help accomplish that.
Anybody have any brief comment by way of response to
Well, I'll just say one thing that I've met with Dr. Jones and his wife. I've also met with their two sons, both wonderful young men. We've had, I think, a polite and cordial back and forth. We've also now talked to our coaches, our athletic directors, and our principals. And I mean, as Jeff said, there is kind of a mixed bag here. There are the coaching and the track community that have a close, tight bond where they don't struggle so much with it. Our coaches, for a number of reasons, our principals and athletic directors have some other reasons why they don't think so. I have sided in this discussion for this time with the coaches, with the principals and athletic directors to keep it a closed public school championship. And I have shared with the Joneses that we are moving away from that format next year, that it will be a public school championship. The Joneses have been very gracious to talk about perhaps letting all the kids run together and score it as a parochial, public, and an open championship. They've proposed a number of alternatives that I think were all reasonable, but at the same time, some of the historical influence have kind of prevailed, and so that's why they're here today. I shared with them that really the last court of appeals for them, in essence, would be this board. But it's also, I shared with them as recently as yesterday that this board has a hard time legislating anything from the dais on a non-agended item. So I think they just really wanted you to hear, and if there's some consensus to direct me to think differently with the athletic directors, I could do that. But again, I think, to be fair to the coaches, to be fair to the principals, to be fair to the athletic directors, we've asked them to weigh in, and the overwhelming 2/3 of those bodies have said no, not this year.
Is there other comment anybody would like to offer?
Could I ask just a question? Does this come under the purview of a policy, or is this operational? I see it as more operational, but I'm curious.
It is operational in the sense that it's really between the school superintendent, the athletic association, and the directors of athletics at the individual schools. It really is. There's not a formal board policy that's at play here.
I was just looking through board docs.
You didn't find, that's what I was curious if there was one. Thank you.
I did share with the Joneses that we work as a team, however, in trying to make the schools open and accessible, and I believe that's why they're here.
No, understood. I just was curious. I hadn't had a chance to really look into whether we had a policy that spoke to this question or not. Thank you.
Now, I'll just speak briefly to, I've shared some of this with my colleagues earlier. I grew up in an area where there was a really sharp and sometimes difficult divide between public schools and private schools. It was uncomfortable because we're all in the same community, right? And I would like to see, moving forward, us do what we can to get away from that. And whether it's, and I don't want to overstate it, but whether it's some of the barriers that are broken down on athletic fields historically, and I won't name names, but you can all think of barriers that have been broken down. To me, athletics are a big part of what brings us all together, whether it's cheering for the Ravens or not cheering for the Ravens, or it's something that brings a community together. So my hope, and I'm not inclined, as much as it pulls at your heartstrings, I'm not inclined to direct the superintendent to change his direction he's given to his staff for something that's going to happen next week. But I would just say, speaking as an individual, that I would hope that moving forward in future years, we can find more ways that we can have that sort of spirit that comes from competition to work public and private schools together. So I would just offer that. I don't want people to grow up feeling like the public school kids live in one area and the private school kids go someplace else. We're all in Washington County, and we all pledge allegiance to the same flag. Any other comment?
Just one quick thing, and I can understand where you're coming from. And I will echo what Dr. Harding said in regards to how we deal with this. I would not feel comfortable directing the superintendent to change the decision that he has made with input from a variety of groups. I will tell you, I coached for 29 years in Washington County, and we have come a long way since I coached. There was no playing. We didn't play games against St. James. We did not play games against Goretti. We did not have any contact because there were barriers. You said about the out-of-state students. That was one of the things. The time frames for practices were another. There were a lot of different ages of all things. I mean, in Maryland, you get to a certain age, you cannot compete, even if you're still in school. So some of those barriers have broken down, obviously, because you said we've had dual meets with Goretti and North and South, and I know St. James plays football against Hancock and some other, I know that when I was coaching St. James, we played games against some public schools. But it's going to take some more time, I think, to break down those barriers so we can get to where Dr. Harding is looking to go. And I think the overwhelming majority of us are looking to go. So thank you for your time, and like I said, I do understand where you're coming from, but from this seat, it's difficult for me to recommend something to the superintendent that he has worked on for a while and gotten input from a lot of people.
Any other comment? I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Very much.
Thanks very
You bet.
much.
Is there anybody else who'd like the opportunity to speak? Yes, ma'am, please. Come on up front. But just because we need the microphone to pick you up so that for folks watching at home.
Hello.
If you just introduce yourself.
My name's Kia Tisdale, and I'm a physician here in the community as well as a parent of a first grader at Rockland Woods.
Nice to meet you, Kia. Welcome.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first being, I wanted to know what specific strategies you guys are using to recruit and attract minority teachers, because even before Harrison entered Rockland, I have been pretty disappointed in what I perceive as a lack of minority teachers. I think we went there, he's in first grade, I think we went for a homeowners meeting maybe about a year and a half before he entered school, and there's a board of all the teachers, the counselors, the cafeteria workers, and not one minority face that I could pick out. And so now he's in first grade, and I just want to know what is specifically being done to attract minority teachers. My husband had called before Harrison started school, and in a nutshell, he was told that they just don't want to come. And I mean, I'd never followed up, but now I have the opportunity and just wanted to come and just know what is the plan, the strategy, because it's a little disappointing.
I can tell you it's something that we as a board have discussed, certainly since I've been on the board for 5 years, as to the specific operational things that are being done in order to reach that goal. Really, the superintendent and the HR director would be the best people to talk to about that.
So let me talk about just a couple of things, and then I'm going to refer you to Ms. Francisco, who will talk to you more specifically. One of the things that I did upon coming to the school district was to review our recruiting strategies. I actually participated last year in some of those on-campus visits where we visited not only traditional colleges and universities where we had an emphasis on recruiting minority candidates, but also our business took us to HBCUs, trying to go to some of the historically black colleges and universities to see if we couldn't attract minority candidates to the system. We have made a concerted effort, but we have not been successful. I would simply say this, that we have to redouble our efforts. We have talked about that internally. We'll have very specific targets. We will talk to our principals about the conversations that they need to have. We'll talk about incentive packages. But again, I would refer you to spend some time with Laura. One of the things that we find is a challenge, quite honestly, is then when we go, people tend to look to talk to people who look like them, and we don't have many people who are African American or black Americans. I will tell you what's interesting, if you look to your right, you will see our Chief Academic Officer, who is a new hire to this district. Angela Domain, Dr. Domain, comes to us from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She was specifically chosen to come to this district to lead our academics. She just happens to be a black female. We're very pleased with that, but that allows us to begin to have some conversations with people who look like the people that we're trying to recruit and bring to our classrooms for our kids. I think if you would take a look at my background, you would see that I have traditionally served in school districts that had large representations of African Americans, community members, and faculty. And we are going to do our best to make sure that every kid sees someone who looks like them in a position of authority and a position of responsibility, not just in food service.
Well, good. That sounds awesome. And you'll give me the name of, you said Francisco?
Yes, Dr. Francisco is going to meet you as you go out the door, and she may ask you to serve on an advisory committee. I can see her mind working over the podium.
That would be great.
Thank
And then I had a second question. I recently went to an information session. We got a flyer about different educational programs for elementary schools. And so I went, it was at the Technical High School, and it was specifically for magnet programs. And so I was disappointed because it was very, very focused on the magnet children, the top 2%. I was expecting kind of an overview of enrichment programs that might even be voluntary, that kids could go to, like a math club, a science club. So I did email the principal, and I have not yet heard from her, but I also emailed Harrison's teacher, and she said that until about the 4th or 5th grade, there really are no enrichment programs. And so, you know, you have your children who are going to be identified as extremely bright based on whatever testing is done. And then I know the children who have special needs get a lot of individualized treatment too. But, you know, my concern is the children that fall somewhere between those two that may be bright and may have parents who want to get them engaged beyond the classroom and even beyond what we do at home. So what is there for them, or what plans maybe are in place to have programs for those other children that aren't 2% magnet, that aren't having IEPs or whatever else, you know, there is?
Those are great questions, and it's interesting because the board just had a conversation today as we were talking about vision for the 21st century and, you know, into our foreseeable future, where we talked about the options that we provide for kids. And really they're extremely numerous, and so I'm going to say a couple of things to you. The first is you're going to get to meet another district administrator, Dr. Domain, who will talk to you about those specific programs. And right behind her, the tall gentleman with the tie is our director of elementary programs, and he's going to tell you some specific things that your son or daughter could be engaged in at either Rockland Woods or another school in the county. We absolutely believe that every kid has an innate goodness and an innate potential. We want to bring that out of them. Sometimes we don't do the job that we should, but we're working hard every day to make sure that we reach and teach every child that comes through our doors. And we know that not every child is going to come with great interest in academics, but they might come with an understanding or a deep appreciation for robotics or art, and we're going to use that then to teach those other things. So Dr. Domain will meet you as well, and Matt Semler will spend some time talking to you as well.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you for coming.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Tisdale. Is there anybody else who would like the opportunity to speak?
I would.
Great. Go for it.
Thank you. I simply want to say to the larger community, I'm going to step out in just a few moments and attend an activity on behalf of my family, and so I won't get the opportunity to share with you in the normal time frame a request that I made. And I want the community to know that some time ago I requested an ethics advisory opinion, and it dealt specifically with allowing board members to participate in the negotiations process. As many people who watch this program know, or those who observe what we do, they know that several of our board members, because they have spouses who work in and around the system, they have recused themselves from participating in the negotiations process. That was in a belief that came through an oral opinion that they were somehow unduly influencing the decision-making around salaries and benefits of our employees. But quite honestly, when you're dealing with a budget that approaches almost $300 million, to build a great budget plan, you have to have a wide variety of thinking and a wide variety of perspectives. So I asked our attorney, Tony Trotta, if he would convene the ethics panel to review the ethical behavior of employees or of board members as it relates to this process. And I want to report to you that the ethicists have come back and said that they do not see a conflict for individual board members by participating in this process. I will simply say to you that what they have said is that given the budget that and benefits package that makes up almost 82% of the dollars the public entrusts us with, we are really required, in essence, to have the best thinking of the entire group, that the citizens of this county elected you to participate in processes like this so that we can provide the best education for kids. This opinion will be posted on our website for any citizen to see, because we do not want anyone in our community to think that a board member is acting improperly. Again, this came as a result of my request to the attorney and to the ethics panel to weigh in on my ability to work with a full complement of elected board members. As I said, this will be posted on our website tomorrow for anybody who wants to read the entire opinion. But I thought it was very important that I announce this evening as we are entering into the bargaining season. I don't know if any board members have a specific question or request of me at this time, but I do want you to know that I put this in your Friday packet of this week, so it came home in your Friday mail if you did not see it. And we did have a chance to mention that I would be making this comment this evening.
Okay. Any brief questions? Okay.
And with that, Mr. President, I'm going to ask for your leave for a few moments.
You don't need my permission.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is old business regarding suspension of policy BAA. Mrs. Fisher, do you want to state your motion?
Yes, thank you, sir. I move to lift the suspension of policy BAA.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. President.
Second by Mr. Ridenhour. Ms. Fisher, you have the right to speak first to your motion if you wish.
The policy was suspended, I believe, on October 1st and remains indefinitely suspended, although it does state in our rules that it has to be temporary, but the motion did not put any end date on that. And so the policy is just kind of in limbo at this state. Therefore, I believe it should be, that suspension should be lifted so that any further business that needs to be taken care of with BAA can proceed.
Okay, are there any other comments?
I have
Mrs.
a
Williams?
question. My question would be, let me back up. My understanding of the policy and the motion, as Mr. Ridenhour made it, that the motion to suspend the policy was to refer the policy to the committee. Why then would the suspension of the policy not end with the final board action, which occurred on the second reading of the policy. So I guess what I'm saying is I question why we're having to take a vote to lift the policy, and why is the policy not lifted? Because we've gone through the procedure that Mr. Ridenour's motion outlined.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Trotta to come forward and speak to that question. I'm afraid I won't get it quite accurate, so.
Thank you. This morning, the policy committee had a meeting, a public meeting, and this was one of the questions that was posed during that proceeding. And the board on August the 6th passed a motion to suspend policy BAA. And since that time, they have not taken any affirmative action to reverse that action, although this evening Mrs. Fisher has offered such a motion. The fact that there was some sort of action on a second read that concerned the policy, and I believe that failed for a lack of a second, really has no bearing on the initial motion, which still stands to suspend the policy. So it's necessary for the board, if it's so inclined, to take affirmative action to lift that suspension.
Sure.
Do you have the original motion as Mr. Ridenour stated it? Do we have that?
It would be in the minutes, but I don't know if we have those minutes available at this time.
Are there other comments or questions? There clearly was a disagreement about whether, and I'll just, because I was in that policy meeting, there clearly is a disagreement about whether the policy remains suspended or whether it's not suspended. And I think Mrs. Fisher has said, why don't we just end the confusion, and if the board votes to end the suspension of the policy, then we all know the policy's not suspended, and we don't have to have a sort of internal disagreement about the procedure. I think that's at least that's the sense I got from her discussion in the policy meeting this morning. Whether the suspension was lifted at the second read or whether it's lifted today, if this motion passes, regardless, it's lifted. Are there other comments or questions? Mrs. Harshman?
I too am a little confused because originally when the policy was suspended, I thought the suggestion was that it would go to the policy committee, which when the policy committee acts upon it, would seem to me that would break the suspension because we would be working with the policy. So then when it went to second read and failed to get a second, it's my understanding that it reverted to the original policy, which then became a policy that was in effect up until this point in time. So that was my understanding also.
I would just say that I think this disagreement is exactly what I think motivated Mrs. Fisher, and I was initially on the other side, but I think it's what motivated her to say, let's just make it very clear. The whole board can vote to lift the suspension on the policy, and then it's very clear to everybody whether the suspension was lifted back then or now, the suspension's lifted. I think this disagreement is exactly what I think motivated her motion. Is there other discussion? If not, the question's on Mrs. Fisher's motion to lift the suspension on policy BAA. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0 and the student member concurs. Next is on the agenda under old business is a motion by Mr. Ridenour. Mr. Ridenour, would you?
Yes, Mr. President. I move for a first read to rescind policy BAA and exhibit BAA-E.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Bailey. Is there any discussion? Mr. Ridenour, you have the right to speak first.
Not at this time, Mr. President.
Anybody wish to offer comments?
I do. earlier this evening, Ms. Harshman made a comment about this policy and indicated that the public needs to see how we evaluate ourselves. Past practice does not put this discussion or this evaluation in a public meeting. So the public would not know the results of any evaluation either way.
Under what does it go into closed meeting? What is the reason for putting it in closed meeting? Are there any certain things?
I don't have that
It
list with me,
was a
but
retreat. It wasn't under open meetings in the past. I'm
Yes.
sorry.
she's right, it was always done in a retreat.
Well, we had not decided whether it would be done in a retreat, had we? In fact, we had not decided anything, because the only thing we decided was that someone wanted to rescind it. I think the original motion was to talk about how we could evaluate, not where we were going to or when necessarily, but how we could do it. And I don't believe anybody mentioned a retreat in that motion.
No, they weren't. I was just trying to clarify the point that you made, because in the past, it's never been done publicly. So I don't think that's a valid argument at this point, unless something would be added and changed to say it has to be in a public
It doesn't say
venue.
that it has to be at a private either, nor does.
No,
nor
but
has it
practice
been done.
has set a precedent, I think, for
Nor has
many,
it been
many
done
years.
for years and years, so, it's kind of up in the air and ignored. So I was hoping that we could get something done that would show good faith.
Are there other comments to the motion? Mrs. Williams?
Yes, I firmly believe that the problem is not that policy BAA is a bad policy. I don't believe it to be an outdated policy. I think this policy needs to be maintained. I think this board needs to commit to work together to determine a process in keeping with the policy that will allow us to examine our practices, our processes, our operations, and our effectiveness. I will say that I had the opportunity to attend the Maryland Association of Board of Education conference last week, and it was very difficult for me to sit there and listen to my counterparts in Prince George's County talk of the board self-evaluation that they had recently conducted, and all of the good things that had come out of that with regard to changes that they had made in the way they do things. I also heard from my counterparts in Frederick County, who I believe are meeting this week to conduct or to discuss how they're going to do their board evaluation. I believe in leading by example, and if we hope to have a school system with a climate and culture in which all strive for excellence and all seek for continuous improvement, I think that it's important that we, the elected board, model that which we expect of others. And so I'll be voting not to rescind this policy.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Are there other comments? Mrs. Bregman?
I'm going to attempt to come at this a little bit differently. And I know this is a very sensitive subject, and we all have some emotional issues, I think, with the outcome. And I want to be sure that we're all aware, and I would like to thank Mrs. Williams again for bringing this up originally, because I think it's an important discussion to have. We have over 250 policies, and not to sound arbitrary, but I think we need to really reduce that number. I think we need to get serious about what a policy really is. And as state officials and the school system and the board members are not local officials, we are considered state officials, and we live under state statute, education articles, and the Code of Maryland regulations. And just looking in the regulations and the law, the definition of policy is really a what and why question with regard to the board's setting of a course of action for the whole school system. Board policies establish a framework of guideline for the operation of the school system. And what I would suggest that as we review all of our policies and hopefully revise and rescind many of them, particularly ones that are already at a state level, I think, addressed, there ought to be a litmus test as to what we consider policy and what we consider a best practice. And I think the substance of BAA better and BAAE better fit under a best practice rather than a policy. And just like the mission and vision and mission work session we had this morning, to me, that's the opportunity, and I thought that was done in a very collegial way where we all decided we need to look again at our vision and mission. We got together as a group, we had a facilitator, the superintendent was in the room, and I thought it was a very productive, positive meeting. And I would like to see this, the substance of BAA, moved more toward a best practice where we as a group can say, or four of us, a majority of us, or all of us can come together and say, you know, it's time to sit down and come together and discuss something. I really don't think this rises to the level of a public policy. This is more of an internal housekeeping best practice. So I will be voting to rescind BAA and BAAE.
Thank you, Ms. Brightman. Are there any other comments?
Mr.
Mr.
President, thank you. I think my issue has been, and I've been involved in numerous retreats and self-evaluation meetings. The problem becomes not what we're after. If what we're after is improvement of the full board, then the actions have to be ad rem. In other words, we need to discuss relevant, pertinent information that would improve board performance. The problem is that I've never sat through one that didn't become ad hominem. That being, people who disagreed started attacking other people's character, their ideas, their beliefs, using prejudice and emotion instead of reason. Consequently, people go out with hurt feelings. They go out in a less than collegial atmosphere, and instead of improving board performance, feelings are hurt and people are not inclined to work collegially, as Mrs. Brightman spoke to. So, obviously, I support this. I don't believe that at this time we are ready for it, because I've seen too many, even this year. When someone speaks to an issue, whether it's a policy or a practice or whatever the case might be, and another member says what that individual has just commented on is ridiculous, that's not productive. You're not attacking the issue anymore, you're attacking that person in their position. So I think that, we have to, I think it's best that we move away from having this policy that mandates it, and if we decide that we want to have a retreat at some point in the future, then any member has the opportunity or has the right to offer that as a possible agenda item, and if the majority of the board agrees to it, then so be it. This time, I think that it's time to take a vote on this, to make a determination of what is the will of the board, and the will of the board is the majority's decision. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Are there other comments?
Everybody who wishes to speak have a chance to speak once. Okay, Mrs. Harshman.
Well, again, I will be voting against rescinding this policy because we evaluate every other person in the school system. So in that spirit, we should certainly evaluate ourselves.
Any other comments? Seeing none, the question is on Mr. Ridenhour's motion to rescind on first read policy BAA and exhibit BAA-E. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes 5-2. The student member concurs with the majority. Next on the agenda is new business. First is consideration of a consent agenda. Good evening, Ms. Freeman.
Good evening.
Six items under procurement on the consent agenda for your consideration this evening. I'm going to do a quick read through and then I'll turn the motion back to the board. The first item is a requisition for a site license to continue our relationship with GaggleNet Incorporated for archiving space on their servers. The total of that requisition is $44,344. The unit rates are the same rates that we've paid GaggleNet in the past year for the same services. I am told by my IT folks that this is the last year we will be having to outsource these archiving services, that these emails will be now archived on our own servers going forward after this year. The second item on the agenda is the uninterruptible power system for the administrative center. We did receive bids on October 7th. Unfortunately, we only received one bid from Epic Resources Incorporated. The uninterruptible power system is needed to operate with the existing electrical system in the building to provide power conditioning and backup power protection and distribution of electric equipment loads in the central data server room of the new administrative center. The Procurement Review Committee recommends that the board move forward with the single bid, Epic Resources Incorporated of Greensboro, North Carolina, in the lump sum total of $89,270. Third on the agenda is bid 2014-22 for the installation of fiber optic cable and hardware, also for the administrative center. We had 7 companies who attended a pre-proposal meeting here in this facility and then toured with us along the route for the proposed installation of the fiber up to the administrative center. We received bids from 2 companies. The lowest responsive and responsible bidder is Hinkles and McCoy of York, Pennsylvania. That company is recommended to provide the equipment, incidentals, and services needed for the cable system, which will contain a few spliced 96-strand single-mode fiber optic cable from this building to the administrative center. And the total of that contract is $76,215. The fourth item on the agenda is a contract for employee assistance services, recommending an amendment be made to that contract. The board entered into this contract with Meritus Behavioral Health Services in July of 2011 for an employee assistance program. This is the program that helps our employees deal with personnel problems that might adversely affect their work performance. That contract is for 2 years, and the renewal period commenced July 1. It's effective through June of 30th of 2015. This recommendation is to expand the definition of covered spouses to now include same-gender legal spouses and to eliminate the language pertaining to an automated renewal moving forward. Any future renewal options would be exercised by express will of the board, and renewal periods would be for 1 year rather than 2-year terms going forward. All other terms and conditions, including unit rates, remain the same for this second 2-year period under the contract. Item 5 on the agenda is a purchase order, KK 4815, for asbestos abatement of the administrative center. Staff requested and obtained a price quote for the partial removal and disposal of fiberglass duct insulation with asbestos-containing seam mastic found on the first floor of the administrative center. This requisition was processed on October 8th. This was necessary based on the urgency of need to maintain progress of work at the administrative center. The total of the purchase order is $37,556, and the unit rates on the PO are directly taken from the asbestos abatement on-call services contract. The final item is a purchase order also to the same company, Asbestos Specialists Incorporated, to perform lead abatement of the lead paint from the metal corrugated ceiling deck on the ground floor of the facility. This requisition was also processed on October 8th based on need to maintain progress of work at the building. The total of the order is $36,106, and again, the unit rates are taken from the on-call asbestos abatement contract that the board previously approved. That concludes the procurement items on tonight's agenda. Here, as well as other folks behind me, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. President, I move to approve requisition number 165336 to GaggleNet Incorporated for data storage in the amount of $44,344. For bid number 2014-23 to Epic Resources, Inc. for an uninterruptible power system in the amount of $89,270. Bid number 2014-22 to Henkels & McCoy, Inc. for fiber optic cable in the amount of $76,215. First Amendment to the contract with Meritus Behavioral Health modifying the Employee Assistance Program. Purchase order number KK 4815 for asbestos abatement services in the amount of $37,556. And purchase order number KK 4814 for lead abatement services in the amount of $36,106 to Asbestos Specialists, Inc.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Mr. Bailey. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda?
Just one quick comment, just for the record. I believe there was a typographical error in the abatement services for the lead. It's quoting the same figure in the executive summary, same price as the fiber for the asbestos, $37,566, and that number in the last sentence should read $36,106. That's on the executive summary. It's just a typo, I believe.
Yeah, it says 36,106 on
Right.
the copy.
But the bid motion is correct?
The bid motion is correct, but I'm saying, for the record, that probably needs to be struck and corrected.
I apologize, I'm not really following where the typo appears in here, but...
It's in the executive summary. If you have the executive summary, on the fifth column, fifth point, which says asbestos abatement and administrative center, you go down to the last sentence, and it has $37,556.
That's right.
And
That's
then,
right.
And the lead is 36,106.
The next page, the chart kind of is broken up, Mr. Bailey. If you go to the next
See,
page.
here's the other,
You'll see that it's
Oh, that's covered,
two
okay, it's
elements.
covered under number 6.
Yes. That's why I numbered everything. It's hard to follow sometimes.
I retract everything I said.
That's okay.
Are there other comments or questions? Mrs. Williams?
Yes, I have a question about the fiber optic cable bidding. Looking at those two bids, one's about twice as much as the other, and I was just wondering if that was looked into to be sure that the lowest bidder is in fact aware of what it is we need and that we're going to get what it is we need.
I talked to Henkels and McCoy. They were at the bid opening, and they were very comfortable with their price. But as a follow-up, I even called and I talked to the president of the company, who assured me that the price is correct. They were incentivized because they need the work right now, and that's the reason they sharpened their pencil and gave us a good number. So.
Thank you.
Are there other questions on the consent agenda? If not, the questions on the approval of the consent agenda. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank
you, Ms.
you.
Freeman. Next under new business is a gift to Sharpsburg Elementary in the amount of $12,600. Mr. Semler, welcome.
Good evening, Dr. Hardings, Board of Education members. I'm here tonight to request your approval of the gift in the amount of $12,600 from Sharpsburg PTA to Sharpsburg Elementary School. The gift will be used to purchase 20 laptops and a mobile laptop cart to enhance and support instructional technology and classroom instruction for the students at Sharpsburg.
Thank you, Mr. Semler. Is there a motion to approve the gift?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Brightman. Is there any discussion on the gift? If not, all those in favor of accepting the gift? All those opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Semler. Next is personnel action.
Good evening, Dr. Hardings, members of the board. There are several personnel actions for your consideration this evening as discussed in closed session.
Is there a motion to approve the personnel actions recommended by staff?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member abstains.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Next is reports to the board, an update on the West City Elementary School design development.
Good evening, Dr. Hardings and the rest of the board. We're here tonight to present a brief progress report on the design of the West City Elementary School. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. House and Mr. Fite of the Bushy Fite Moore Architects, and then the group will be here to answer any questions that you might have when the report's complete.
Thank you. We're here to present just a quick update of the modifications to the documents since the schematic submission. For the site plan, we removed the bus loop from Hager's Crossing Drive, shifted the building to the south, and now the bus loop is located to the east off of Fuel Court. We eliminated the crossing of the service drive by students during school hours. And we designed the parking areas as two smaller lots and maximize the car stacking area for the drop-off and pickup activities. And we also shifted the athletic fields to be closer to the proximity of the gymnasium. The first floor plan, the major change on this floor is the rearrangement of classrooms. We shifted classrooms to the west, which would be this is what we'll refer to as the core lobby. So we shifted classrooms to the left or to the west of that, and that allowed us to eliminate a third stairwell in the Phase 1 design. It also presented an opportunity for the Phase 2 design to be a single-story design, which also eliminated another stairwell. We moved pre-K classrooms closer to the administration area and the main entrance, and we increased the width of the corridor from the main lobby over to the bus loop, which is now on the east side of the building. And we eliminated the connection corridor, which was to the east side of the IRC, which will be included in the Phase 2 portion of the design. Through some of this increased efficiency, we created collaboration spaces throughout the school, which are located in or identified in the darker orange color. These are small group and student-led instruction areas, approximately 200 square feet in space. They'll be set up with flexible furnishings to be able to set up in a number of different ways. They're accessible from both the classrooms and the corridor. And in the classrooms, we're proposing sliding glass doors so they maintain that openness feel to either both classrooms or one classroom or the other. There's full visual access from the classrooms into these collaboration spaces, and also from the corridors into the collaboration spaces, so you get a real sense of openness with these areas. And also with these changes, we rearranged the classroom toilet facilities and kind of squeezed them in the core of the collaboration space, so the classroom itself becomes more rectangular and more flexible, more usable. In the administration suite, we improved the flow and efficiency of the reception area. We relocated the counselor office to the core of the building, which you see moved down what we're calling the core lobby or the downtown lobby. And we increased the size of the health suite. We added a third cot in an enclosed treatment room. The kitchen and cafeteria, we shifted the kitchen to the west to improve the flow of the students in and around the cafeteria and into the serving lines. We provided a dedicated receiving room and storage off of the entrance off the service area. As I mentioned before, we increased the width of the corridor from the bus loop entrance all the way to the main lobby for adequate pedestrian flow. We provided direct access from the bus loop into the cafeteria for the before and after school programs, and we rearranged the ramp from the cafeteria to the stage and music classroom, so there's direct access from the cafeteria up to the stage. On the second floor, again, with the modifications to the first floor with shifting the classrooms to the west, this allowed us to eliminate a third stairwell within the building, and also allowed us to increase or provide better access to the IRC loft, which is now accessed directly off the main corridor. With the IRC, we located the elevator so it's adjacent to the lobby, but then also accessible directly from the IRC, which will provide direct access from the IRC to the IRC loft, so no student has to go outside to get to, or not outside of the IRC to get to the elevator. And then access to the IRC loft is also available within the IRC. We still have the reading platform and stairs that then they would access a walkway across to the flexible space and reading loft on the second floor. And one major change that we've done to the IRC is to really open up the first floor. We found some efficiencies and some spaces elsewhere in the building, so we really opened up the IRC so it becomes one large area that they can set up in a number of ways to provide maximum flexibility. And we provided an entrance to the IRC from the core lobby. The Phase 2 design, as I mentioned before, is a single-story design now. This will provide for some more efficient construction. This allows for pre-K through grades 3 on the first floor, and then 4th and 5th grades on the second floor, if and when it become a 5-round school. The connection corridor that I mentioned before was just to the east of the IRC is now located to the east of the existing school. This will break up the scale of the corridor and provide better circulation and flow for the total building build-out. The art and science classrooms are located in their own little wing adjacent from the classroom wing and adjacent to also the existing Encore classrooms. And then this also allowed us to provide a hardscaped courtyard that could be used by the IRC and or the Encore classes. The exterior of the building, we're looking at the use of masonry colors and patterns and even texture to reduce the scale of the building so it fits within the context of the surroundings and the neighborhood. And we are looking at ways to identify the entrance from both the bus loop and from the parent drop-off loop, to be able to identify the entrances quite easily. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Mrs. Fisher?
Could you tell me the width of the hall from the bus loop to the main lobby and the width of the hall in the classroom areas?
From the bus loop over to the main lobby and then down to the core lobby is 12 feet wide, and then it is 8 feet wide down the classroom wings.
And I'm also a bit concerned, you've eliminated 3 stairwells?
Eliminated 2
Or
stairwells.
2 stairwells?
Yes.
Does that pose a problem in case of fire or other emergencies?
No, actually, when we shifted the classrooms, before the shift, we had too great of a distance from the end of the building to where the central stair was, which required the 3rd stairwell in the original design. By shifting the classrooms, so they're basically located between the 2 stairwells, we were allowed to eliminate that stairwell. So we do have stairs on each side of the, or on each end of the 2nd floor.
But while that makes access to those stairwells closer, once students start down those now just 2 stairwells, could that become a problem in an emergency with panic and so on, just having?
No, the width of those stairs will be dictated by the life safety code, and we certainly take that into account when we calculate and size those stairwells.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments or discussion?
Mrs. Brightman?
Just a brief one. One, just thank you to the design team. I know this has been a fairly interesting process this time around, and I want to applaud your patience and your perseverance and your willingness to work with the board in a little bit different way. One baby step at a time toward a 21st century school, so I appreciate the effort. One very minor question, and I think after the stairwell discussion, I may have answered it, but I'm going to ask anyway, on the potential future expansion, and it's also on the first floor, this exterior door in the central that is on your southern Hager's Crossing would be coming from there into the school. Is it there just to give a sense to Hager's Crossing that there's an entrance there? It seems like I don't know if there's code as to how long a distance between exit doors. I assume there's some reason that's in that odd place. It seems like when the new addition, if the new addition is added, that would be the place. Because now, when that's added, that seems like a pretty long stretch between doors with the addition. Am I sort of following or making myself understood?
Yeah, it is for egress purposes in Phase 1, but then also if the administration would want to open that up to pedestrians for arriving at school, they could certainly...
Could they close that off so that goes straight to the gym and cafeteria from there? Is there total security from the rest of the hallways?
Actually, we're setting up the gymnasium so you can enter the gym without entering any other part of the school.
So
we'd still have
it's
them
not
walk
really
around.
access to that. So-
Mostly life safety, egress, flexibility for the school to take students in and out of the school during the day as they need to. Those are the reasons. A similar school at Ruth Ann Monroe, at the center of those wings, as they spread out, also had doors right in the center area there. So, but mostly, the first thing is the egress.
Yes.
Okay.
It's right at the base of that stairwell, so that when the kids come down from the students come
The
down from the
stairwell's
top,
right
right
there.
out the door.
Seems like it's sort of out of the way and a potential, but I know all the exterior doors are locked, so, okay, very good, thank you.
Mr. Bailey?
I think I know the answer before I ask, but the gym is regulation size.
Yes.
What will be used to divide the gym?
The gym from the cafeteria?
No, the gym into two parts.
Yeah, there'll be a net between the two that can be rolled up, dropped down.
We find that works successfully?
Yes.
Is that what Rockland Woods has?
Yes, all the recent schools we built have used a drop net divider. Keeps the airflow around better, and I think over time there's less maintenance on a device like that, and they're also less expensive. To put the high hard walls of a folding partition is really expensive.
And I would assume that all lockers, student lockers, will be along the main corridor walls, inside, built in, not standing alone.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Other comments, Mrs. Harshman?
I still have a concern with the cars that are dropping off students at the front door, going through the parking lot. It just seems that it's adding more problems with pulling in and out of parking spaces. And I don't know exactly how it could be altered or changed or anything else unless there would be another road maybe that goes out and just comes up around over on the far side, just goes out to out toward the drive there.
Out towards
So
Sedgwick
that
Drive?
yeah, so the swing, so that when that swings down here, it would just go straight out, straight out to the road as opposed to through the parking lot. So that if people were coming in to drop off their children, they wouldn't have to drive through those parked cars in case someone was trying to pull out who had been in to visit in the school or something. That just always bothers me that there's a...
Right now, the drop-off procedures are presumed to be coming in this entrance, which is right across the entrance from the existing community center parking lot, and then coming down this way, dropping the student off, and then leaving back that way. And then it's perceived that afternoon pickup, the parents would actually drive in through the northernmost portion, come down, and then that allows adequate queuing area without backing up onto the city street.
No, I was thinking more in line of the people who are in the parking places being either blocked in or starting to pull out and somebody's coming through there and so on, because I can see that that could easily cause some traffic problems, whereas if they never went through the parking lot, they could conceivably not have those problems. So I'm still concerned about the parking lot situation.
Okay, we can certainly look further into that.
I do appreciate the fact that they do not have to cross the area where the loading dock is. Thank you.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes. Earlier on, I expressed a concern about the IRC, the loft stairs and the loft situation. And I'm looking at the second floor plan, and and somewhere I saw, I think, flexible space, reading loft, and I'm just wondering how truly flexible that space is, and I'm assuming that the SWD there on the second floor plan is students with disabilities next to that loft. So I'm just wondering about, is that truly a good use of space to have that loft? And this might be a question for Mr. Semler, how much use that loft would get, and would it not perhaps be more beneficial to increase the size of those grade 5, 4, and 3 classrooms where you have bigger kids who need more space to allow for activities to go on in the classrooms that...
I think some of the idea behind flexible space is just that, so that it can be used from multiple groups of students for various purposes. You could have small groups of kids being pulled out, other than some of the itinerant rooms, but possibly doing a specialized project in that flexible area. There could be some flexible furniture in there that the kids could use for different types of collaboration activities, plus have the access from down below to be able to get possibly research materials or technology that they may need to support what they're doing. So kind of the idea that it's a space that's available for the teachers to do some sort of creative uses other than just work in the classrooms.
Is there enough staff to cover students that would be pulled out and put in
Well,
these?
we obviously don't know what staffing would be there, but the idea would be that students wouldn't be unsupervised. There are other staff such as enrichment teachers, instructional assistants. If teachers are doing collaborative work, potentially one teacher could take one group in the classroom working in these collaborative spaces, and another teacher could take the group to the flexible reading space. So there's definitely ways to do that.
So in terms of capacity, that little loft area obviously wouldn't hold an entire class. We're thinking 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 kids.
It's 550 roughly square feet, and a typical classroom is 850. So you could get roughly 2/3 of a class in there, if the need be.
Thank you.
Are there other comments? I'll sort of echo something Mrs. Brightman said. I think the IRC looks cool. I mean, it has sort of, especially that gangway on the top, it has sort of a studio type feel to it to me. Especially now that I see how it's been sort of rearranged so that it's next to what could become a courtyard, and you can imagine art students and music students and the library students all having access to that space. That I think that's kind of creative and fun, and I look forward to seeing what that looks like, and look forward to seeing how our teachers who bring that creativity with them to work figure out how to use that to engage kids. So I think that's one of those ways that the structure and the form that you build can hopefully inspire teachers, inspire students, and really have an impact on learning. So thank you for the work that particularly went into that. I like it. Are there other comments? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next agenda item is board member committee reports. Mrs. Harshman, curriculum.
We are working on a schedule because we may need to change the next one, which is to be October 29th at 1 o'clock as of right now. But in order to accommodate some things, we will get back with the exact time and place online.
It'll be posted on the web
Yes,
so that everybody
as soon
will know.
as everybody
All right.
agrees.
Thank you, Mrs. Harshman.
Sorry.
Mr. Bailey, Finance?
Yes, the Finance Committee met yesterday in a special meeting to review with the staff and Bolton Consulting Group on the 403B plans for our employees and the 457 plans that are offered for the Finance Department will be bringing information to be shared with the entire board in the very near future.
Mrs. Fisher, Policy Review and Development?
Policy Committee met earlier this morning. We reviewed 4 policies that are related to student eligibility, class rankings, and graduation requirements. 3 of these will be coming forward for first read next month. Next, we reviewed 4 DJ policies. These deal with purchasing, and these will also be coming forward for first read next month. We briefly discussed policy BAA, which we've already dealt with in this meeting. We reviewed policy EEA, which is people transportation and its regulation. That was reviewed based on a parental concern, but we recommended no changes to that policy. We will meet again on November 12th. It's open policy. Anyone's welcome to attend. The agenda will be forthcoming.
Mrs. Brightman, Facilities?
Facilities will not be meeting in October. That meeting has been canceled. That was scheduled for next Tuesday, and that information has been posted on the webpage. Our next meeting will be November 26th at 10:15 at Bester at the construction trailer.
Mr. Ridenhour, Human Resources?
Human Resources has not met since the last board meeting. We will be meeting, will not be meeting this month. We'll meet again in November.
Thank you. Mr. Grunendijk, Student Government?
Student government met this morning from 9 till about 1 or so, and we elected our secretary. There was a tie at the last election, so we needed to have a revote, and we elected a new secretary. And then we also discussed the ideas for a mission and vision statement and did various other administrative things.
Excellent, Mrs. I think as we told you, we had our sort of work session on it today, and Ms. Francisco has compiled all of the information that's come from the public and I guess what board members generated today. Just make sure that she gets whatever student government came up with so it can be part of the next stages in the process, if you haven't already.
All right, thank you.
And anything from MABE, legislative, or board of directors?
Nothing right now. Our first legislative committee meeting will be next Monday, and we're still trying to get a few districts to supply membership, but I think all of Washington County has covered. We have all of the different committees covered. So that's great. For the first time, we have a representative on all of the committees, so I appreciate my colleagues making that effort. Thank you.
Sure. And to the members on the MABE Conference Committee, I'll just say I enjoyed the conference. I wasn't there for the whole time, but was there for, I guess, more than half of it. And there were a lot of people clearly having a good time. So I'll just say from my perspective, thanks for all your hard work in making that event a success. Clearly it was a good time for a lot of people, I think, and informative too. So if you have anything else you'd like to add about the committee or the conference?
I just wanted to say that we had a wonderful keynote speaker the first day from, he did a leadership presentation with lessons learned from the Battle of Gettysburg. And it was most informative and very, very creative and entertaining. We also had Dr. Lillian Lowry on the next day. On Thursday, she gave a core curriculum instruction informational session. And I facilitated a workshop called Students Leading Students, which was presented by Calvert County students, and it was an amazing presentation. The program enables minority students to practice leadership skills, and I'm hoping to get some more information on it and see if we can get them to do a presentation for us, because it's a very successful program and extremely beneficial. And it gave me the opportunity to meet a lot of colleagues from around the entire state, and was extremely beneficial to learning and experiencing it, and I thank the board for allowing us to go.
Absolutely. Mrs. Williams, anything else to add?
I'll save mine for board member comments, if
Okay,
that's
very,
okay.
very well. That's great. Next on the agenda is the projected cost for implementation of state discipline regulations. Mr. Trotta, can you stand in for Dr. Wilcox?
Very, very difficult.
It is a big job, isn't it? And Mr. Akers, thank you. So just some background, the board over a month ago had a beginning of a discussion about whether we want to take any positions regarding the state discipline regulations that have been released maybe a week or two ago. The open comment period is open now and closes on October 30th, as I understand it. And the purpose of the discussion today is to follow up on the board's request for staff to provide us any information about what the cost of those regulations might be to the school system, and then for us as a group of 7 to decide, 8 to decide whether we would like to take a position as a board during the open comment period. So with that, Mr. Trotta.
Yes, thank you very much. My office and Mr. Akers' office have been following this very, very carefully along with me, and we've shared with the members of the board and the superintendent the various communications that have been provided by me with regard to this particular topic. And most recently, the state did issue its proposed regulations, and they will be taking action at their meeting on December 10th, 2013. We have plenty of time in which to submit comments if the board is so inclined to do so. And Mr. Akers will now provide the board with an overview of some of the major provisions and proposed changes that the state board is considering.
The primary changes to this regulation regarding discipline is that it changes some of the definitions of suspension, whether a suspension is considered extended, et cetera. It has changed those a little bit. It has changed the process, especially for appeals, and it now has a 10-day limit for getting back to parents for an extended suspension, and 45 days for appeals to the Board of Education. We've been following that for years, so it's really not a change for us, but it is a change for some people in the state. It also requires, and this is probably where a lot of the expense might come in, it requires a liaison at each school to be a contact for parents whose children have been suspended, to ensure that the required work, and it really this changes really require that work is not only provided but graded and returned, and that there's sort of a two-way process with work that's, typically right now students are provided enough work to do during the time period that they're suspended, and when they come back typically they bring it back and it's graded, and there's a little bit of time there. Now I think the vision is more of a two-way, constant back and forth during the suspension, and that of course requires, because teachers are obviously tied up at most of the time during the day, it requires someone to be in the school who is that liaison, who would make that possible for a parent to do that. Then two other additional changes that it's just simply in 2015-16 will be required to report any arrests that occur on school property, and also we will be required to report our discipline data and primarily looking at whether or not there's a disparity among various subgroups as far as the frequency of suspension and that sort of thing. And if it is determined that there is some disparity, then a plan for improving that has to be submitted and implemented within a year. And I guess that'll be an ongoing thing. So you might go 3 or 4 years and not have any disparity, but if suddenly you start to see that, then you would have a plan. You'd have to immediately put a plan into place and then have it implemented and have it have some positive impact within a year to improve it. I would just comment that we have one of the lowest suspension rates in the state. Last year, in sort of seeing this coming down the road, we tightened up further the things that students can be suspended for, especially in the area of insubordination and disrespect, as opposed to which is what I should say the state would define as non-dangerous, non-violent behavior, which they're really trying to reduce the number of suspensions for those things. And so we were able to cut those by 50% last year. So, and we already had a pretty low suspension rate. So as we know, we have a great community, and our kids are generally very cooperative, and we don't have huge discipline problems like some school districts face. So again, we're probably most concerned about the cost of some of these things, implementing, again, a liaison at each school with that responsibility of passing that information back and forth, providing the work to parents, and it's just something that will be very new to us. So that there will be some cost associated with that.
Thank you, Mr. Akers. Is there any discussion from my colleagues?
I just would like, Mr. Akers, all principals have the opportunity to weigh in on the policy?
Yes, we've had several discussions about this, primarily with the supervisors, student services coming and meeting with principals through regular council meetings. But because this has sort of been on the horizon for a long time, we kind of had those discussions and made the adjustments. The only thing we haven't done is, obviously we haven't made any personnel changes because this hasn't been enacted, so that piece about the work hasn't been figured out, although I assume most principals are probably thinking about who's going to have that responsibility in their building, whether it's an assistant principal or a guidance counselor or somebody of that nature. So.
On the discipline data that's being looked at for disparity, is the intent to look at disparity based on nature of offense, or is it just to be, this is how many of one group was suspended, this is how many of another group was suspended?
Yeah, I think the original task force, that was really the first thing that they were looking at, that there's disparity between, for example, the number of times that all students are suspended and African American students, especially in some school districts. I think most school districts have some disparity, but I think it's pretty pronounced in some school districts. And so that's, I think, what they initially wanted to address. But as they sort of, as these things normally do, they charged MSDE with looking into it, and they came up with 3 committees, and of course, it grew. But that was the original charge and the original purpose.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, let's say you had in a school gang activity of some sort, and there are some gangs that are racially based in terms of their membership. And if you had, for example, a lot of gang activity from one particular gang, and I'm not saying we got gangs in our schools, but one could imagine a case, in not here but someplace else, where you had a gang that was primarily made of people of one particular, it could be gender because there are female gangs, let's say female. and they were engaged in a lot of violent criminal type activity, and the decision was made to suspend a number of those students. Would that put the district in jeopardy because there would be a disparity between the number of female students suspended and the number of males?
Well, I think it's going to look at data over time and look
Okay.
more at trends and to see if, just as a general trend, that one subgroup, whether it's females, whoever, is being suspended more frequently. So I don't think it might show up in our data because we have so few, relatively few suspensions, but I think if they look at it, and they will be looking at it over time, a single incident or something like that, I don't think is going to skew the data too much. But certainly, is there, does it give you pause to think, that they're not looking at the reasons for suspensions or anything? It's just numbers are numbers.
That's
And
what
so
I'm
I
getting
get
at.
your-
Is it
yeah.
just numbers here, or is it really, is the intent to look at, well, here's the reason the numbers are the way they are, and that may be a good reason, it may not be a good reason, but.
There's a notation that's in the state proposed regulations indicating that they must hire an expert. So they have not really finalized the model that they're going to use yet. They do have some time, we do have some time, because these requirements, if they're adopted, and I believe that they will be adopted, perhaps with some amendments, we're hopeful that will go into effect not the upcoming school year. So there will be time to look at our current policy, to look at our current administrative regulations, and to make any necessary adjustments. But they haven't defined that model yet that they're going to be using to calculate that particular, the impact.
Mrs. Fisher?
Is there a chance they might consider the offense and not just numbers? Because I see a problem if they just numbers and numbers and don't look at the reasons.
Well, I think a lot of it might be addressed in the plan that you have to come up with. If you feel as though there is, and I don't know what the number is going to be, but if you decide that you've reached that amount of disparity, that you have to do a plan to correct it, that I would assume there's going to be something in there where you explain the disparity or what you feel is the cause of the disparity, and then come up with an appropriate plan. If you don't think the plan is based on any kind of bias in your application of your disciplinary rules and procedures, and yet you're still getting some disparity, then it might be more of a proactive plan that has nothing to do with the fairness of the policy, just what you're doing as a school district to maybe be proactive and prevent some of these things before they happen.
And I would note there's one option available to the board. One of the comments that you might want to consider submitting to the state board is that once this model is developed, that there should be public comment on the model to make sure it properly captures the information.
And the questions you presented with us are the right questions to be asking them.
Mrs. Bright?
Trying to figure out what exactly we as a board, I agree with Mr. Trotta that this regulation in some form will move forward. And my understanding is the state board felt that local boards were not doing the right job, and so they were going to do our job for us. So I think maybe the best we can do is to come up with 3 or 4 or 5 comments, suggested amendments, adjustments that we as a board can agree to, and have a response to the regulations before the deadline, knowing that that's probably just the first step. And one of those could be to review, as you just suggested, to review these regs once they're in place and see if there is an opportunity to try to adjust them after the fact. here's my secondary concern, and I don't know if it would make a good strategic plan to put both together or to handle it separately, but the state is also looking at the code of conduct. And what, we haven't seen the draft yet, but what I'm being told, or what we're told, that they're going to actually set up state standards for all the offenses, how they're categorized, the consequences, and there will be no local discretion. Drug offenses are going to be considered a soft offense, so no expulsion, no suspension, and what the chatter around Board of Eds throughout the state is, if indeed they put a drug offense into a soft offense category, there's going to be a thought process that may lead our school administrators to just talk to our school resource officer, who has the authority to look at this in a criminal way, and it's sort of out of our, it's no longer our problem. It becomes somebody else's problem, and that concerns me on many levels. So I guess, Mr. Trotta, Mr. Akers, any suggestion on how should we take them one step at a time and respond to the regs? Should we note our concern about the code of conduct? I just feel the code of conduct, and this is my opinion, is a way of getting around some of the forced changes that were made to the regs, and it's sort of a backdoor way of still getting what the state board thinks we should be doing. So, you know, some of the, I thought maybe a letter could talk about clearer definitions. My concern with the appeals process being only 45 days, that would cause most hearing officers will not be held to that strict a timeline. So to be sure that we met that deadline, we would need to hear appeals totally as a board, which, as we all know, takes, it's our job, and that's fine, but it takes considerable time, days often, to hear those appeals. And it's nice to have an option to go to a hearing officer. So something as simple as a request of 90 days rather than 45 days, that sort of specific ask. And then, of course, wrap everything around the cost and see where we can go there. So those, I know those are sort of going all over, but any guidance that you could offer as to how to best tackle this?
Well, I think the word discretion at the school district level and is probably something that is extremely important. And I was trying to dig through and find it real quick. That was a big compromise they made, where in one sentence they included the word discretion, but when you look at it closely, it doesn't mean a whole lot. So I think anything that you could do to give some discretion back to the school district, because you know, situations and people aren't numbers, and you can't just reduce them to numbers, and we have to rely on people that we know are in this business because, you know, they care about kids and care about the schools.
And they know the community, they know these families, they know the background.
I would agree, and so having those folks have some discretion because, you know, it's not just about, I mean, this really seems intent, and there's nothing wrong with that. It seems very intent on being, and is very concerned with what happens to students who get in trouble and get suspended and those kinds of things. But, you know, we have to give some thought to those students who aren't in trouble and haven't done those things and are sitting in the classroom with them, the students who are. They have some rights and things also. And so finding the right balance is, I think, what this is attempting to do, but they may have gone a little too far. So anything that would give us some discretion, I think, would be helpful.
So local discretion might be the target to go after. My understanding is this code of conduct will set that balance between perpetrators and the victim. And there's no saying where those rights will come out to?
One option the board may want to consider in its comments is to recommend to the state board that it hold an abeyance action on these administrative regulations, since they're so tied into
Until the
the
code of conduct is.
correct, correct, and that it's a disconnect here, and that really to take
We
a,
make that connection for them.
I mean, that, if the board's so inclined, we can certainly include that as a comment. And the other point I would just share, and I really learned this from Mr. Akers, is that even though a student may be involved in activity that's of a criminal nature, the school system is still involved because we still apply our disciplinary process to that student. So it's not a situation where it's just a criminal matter. If it is a criminal matter, it's also a disciplinary matter at the school level to address any student-related issues. So there is a connection there between the activity triggers both processes.
I just want to see if there are any other questions or comments before we start trying to get to the consensus of what to include. Any? Okay, so if I've written it down correctly, we've heard the suggestion that they hold the discipline regulations until the code of conduct is either passed or put out for public comment. Is there consensus to include that as one of the things we'd like to ask the state board to do? I think it makes a lot of sense.
I think it makes sense, yes.
Okay, so that's a yes. Beyond that, we've talked about the definitions, the 45 days for appeals, the cost, and discrepancy. I sort of liked the suggestion that we recommend that they put the discrepancy model out for public comment before it goes into effect. Is there consensus for that? Okay. Do we want to do anything with definitions, cost, or 45-day appeals? All? Okay.
And
A
are
lot of
there
nodding heads.
any particular definitions in particular? And I know that previously Mrs. Brightman has noted her concerns about the behavioral support services, that it's really a term and there's no definition of it. I think you
And it
previous-
uses, in here it says appropriate behavioral support. Well, that's pretty broad. It's left open to interpretation. So whose interpretation? How would we define that? What was the other one? There were a couple I put in here. Excuse me? The liaison, I think the one here is, what is a student's regular school program? So if the student's regular school program, when they're suspended, do they come back to that school? Do we relocate them to another school? Could we send them to Antietam Academy? And that is sort of, is it a regular, if you take students out, regular school program would give us more flexibility. A student's regular school program kind of narrows how we would interpret that. Am I thinking about that correctly?
No, I agree. I agree.
So that would
give
be
us some
one of
that
those
discretion back.
definitions. Posing an imminent threat, it used to be a physical threat, and they took the word physical out. So what is a non-physical imminent threat? What does that look like? What does it sound like? How would we define that?
I don't know if that was a negative or a positive development, because I know some of the concerns that that the directors and supervisors of student services across the state were concerned, is that they really dismiss verbal threats to teachers. So I don't know if by taking the physical out, that meant that a threat could be verbal, but that it had to be imminent. It can't just be a casual, I'd like to, whatever, but But if you take it serious, that even if it's verbal, so maybe I'm being optimistic, but I was hoping that was an improvement to the wording.
I think it could go either way, but you've been in those situations, I haven't been, but it seemed to be confusing. I guess those were the three main definitions.
So we include a section in the letter on definitions, maybe use those as examples or requests for clarity on those in particular. The 45-day appeal, we had good discussion on that discrepancy. Cost, and I think I'd like to sort of wrap it around, at least in an introduction and conclusion, a discussion about local control and local discretion regarding decisions that might be community, that might be different from community to community. And that would be consistent with some of the correspondence we had last year regarding some of this Prince George's County, and it sort of keeps our theme of asking for that local discretion.
Local governance and local discretion. I think that's great. And I think the code of conduct, that is a good way of trying to maybe delay this till we got more information on the code of conduct.
Okay. We'll work to get that letter out.
We will prepare a draft for your consideration.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. So next we have future agenda items. Let's see, we will have on November 5th a presentation of a plaque to Mrs. Harshman from Kitty Blumsack, who's going to come out from MABE. We'll look forward to seeing Kitty. We will have new appointments to the FIAC. We're also going to have the 403B report that was delivered to the Finance Committee yesterday. We're thinking it will be that date, but there may be some scheduling that might make it at the next meeting in November.
Clarification, is that a report or an action item?
What the committee recommended was that it be given as a report under the superintendent's report, since it is one of the items that we tasked the superintendent with this year. He will provide us with the report, and then the full board will reach consensus on whether to pursue the recommendations brought by staff and the comments brought by Bolton Partners, who was the independent party reviewer. Once the board provides that consensus or direction, then staff and the Finance Committee will continue down the road. But we thought this was a good, and Mr. Bailey, check me if I'm not representing it correctly. We thought this was a good checkpoint to bring the full board up to speed and into the conversation, because this sort of started with the full board tasking the superintendent. We've done a lot of work where we feel like we're at a decision point and thought the board ought to weigh in on that. Let's see, we've also, there's one other thing I was going to mention. Nope, I guess not. Next is board member comments. Mr. Grenendike?
Nothing at this time.
Mrs. Harshman?
Nothing additional.
Mrs. Williams?
I'd just like to thank the board for the opportunity to attend the MABE conference in Ocean City. I had the privilege of serving as a facilitator for one of the sessions on Thursday. The session was working with legislators by building an effective partnership, and board members from Montgomery County and delegates and senators were on a panel, and they discussed the relationship between the Board of Ed and elected reps, and that was enlightening. I too found the opening lunch and keynote speaker, Dr. McGough, to be just terribly fascinating, and I enjoyed every minute of that presentation. Another highlight for me was the networking sessions on Thursday. We were grouped with counties that were similar to us in size, and I had the opportunity to sit with some board members from Charles, Carroll, Frederick, and Harford County, and we had some very good conversation about some topics of interest. On Friday, I attended a Hot Topics session on the Maryland ethics law, And that was timely, because what we talked about came to play today, in today's meeting. So again, I thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to thank former board president B. Marie Byers, who early on encouraged me to grow in boardmanship by taking advantage of the things that MABE offered. And she advised me well, so I thank you, B. Marie, for your good advice. I'm finding MABE to be a wonderful source of learning, and I hope that I am growing in boardmanship.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bailey?
I have nothing.
Mrs. Fisher?
I have no comments.
Mrs. Bright?
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Ridenhour?
Yes, Mr. President, there was an opinion that was recently offered by our ethics panel, and based on that opinion, the opinion that was submitted by that panel, I will be exercising my authority as a member to participate in negotiations with all groups in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there anything else from other board members?
I would like to use Mr. Ridenhour's same words, and we'll act accordingly.
And I guess a big ditto here. Having a husband who is a teacher in the system, I am pleased to note that we have a decision from the ethics panel that makes clear what my role can be in the discussion of matters of negotiation. So, thank you.
And my only comment would be to, he's not here, but I'm sure one of his staff will tell him, is to thank Dr. Wilcox for taking the initiative to ask for that opinion. As he's expressed to me many, many times, I think he really recognizes the value that each of the members of the board brings to any conversation that we have. And I think he, through his initiative to at least get the question answered, really put his money where his mouth was on that. And I thank him for that, because I think it will make for a better discussion and better outcomes when we have all 7 members able to sit down and work through the difficult issues that we have to face. If there's no further business before the board, I declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.